Hello and welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us today. I'm Bob Garrison, the Director of Industry Engagement for BNP Media. And today I'm your moderator for this FPA session, which is titled Cracking the Leadership Code, Connection, Communication, and Collaboration in Action with Generational Spin. Today's speaker is Alain Hunkins, and he will be introducing himself and telling you a little bit about himself in just a moment. Today's topic hits at the center of leading across teams, functions, and generations. This is meant to be very practical and very interactive. And we are encouraging you to use the chat throughout. And right now, if you looked in the chat, you would see a link to Alain's website that even already has tools for you coming away from today. Alain brings a very practical approach to leadership. So please introduce yourself and tell us what you're most excited to talk about today.
Hey, Bob. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today. Really excited to be with you. First of all, my name is Alain. It is a French name. My mom is from Brussels, Belgium. It's one of the most common French names you'll find in any French-speaking country, which would have been great had I grown up in a French-speaking country, but I grew up in Queens. And anyway, it's Alain. That's my name. Sticking to it. I'm joining you today, zooming in from Northampton, Massachusetts, a small city about 2 hours west of Boston in the United States. And what I am particularly excited about, the fact is, I know that we're talking about the leadership code. So whether or not you have direct reports or not, this is for you. Because the fact is, my working definition of leadership is anytime we're trying to get anyone to get something done. And sometimes that's just us. We have to lead ourselves every day. And so if you use that definition of leadership, we are all leaders and we are all leading all the time, everywhere. And so, what I'm particularly excited about is to demystify what leadership is. It is not the province of some special charismatic people. It is ultimately a series of practical, tactical skills that we can learn. And this work that I'm sharing with you in my book, Cracking the Leadership Code, wasn't just me sitting in my office thinking about what does this all mean? It came out of me working with literally thousands of groups over the years. And what I saw were patterns. And what I started to do was decipher those patterns to crack the leadership code. And we're going to get into what those patterns are and how you can use them to be more effective. Because at the end of the day, the point of leadership is to make your lives easier, to get better results, and basically make everything a win-win-win. So thanks, Bob.
Yeah. And so, from your experience, just to get started, from your experience, what used to work as a leader that doesn't work anymore?
Great question. So, if you think about it, many of us are familiar with what I call the old school leadership. And what I mean by old school is when you basically leaned into your positional authority, right? I'm the boss, that's why, right? It doesn't work at work. It doesn't work with teenagers. I had two. I now have one. One is aged out of teenagership. But yeah, it's like because I said so, that's why. Today's employee or follower is going to go, and so we can't lean on that, right? We can't lean on just because I said so. You know what? Your motivation is your paycheck. That's why, right? And so people, and I think people get that. We're like, yeah, I get that doesn't work, but what does work instead? And that's what we're going to have to focus on today is what are the things that do work to make things work? But yeah, the old school model of because I said so, the world has changed and it is moving too fast for that kind of leadership. In the old school model, it was the leader had all the answers and would tell everyone what to do,
Yeah.
and your job was to basically shut up and do it. There's a famous story of Henry Ford. You've all heard of Henry Ford, I assume, the founder of Ford Motor Company. So they were building Model Ts, right? That was one of the most famous cars on the assembly line they were building. And Ford famously said of his employees, "Why is it every time I want a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached?" Right? So if you think about it, like that's not the world that we live in. See, they could get away with that world because you've heard of the Model T. The Ford assembly line ran that Model T on the factory floor without making a single change to it for over 19 years. Right? Think about how slow that was. Like you're thinking things didn't change for 19 years. I wish things around here didn't change every 19 minutes. I mean, that is not the world that we live in. So clearly, if we're holding on to an outdated leadership playbook, we're gonna fail. And so we need a new playbook to be able to lead in today's world.
Yeah. Okay. So our title again, and we're gonna follow this as a kind of a roadmap for us. The title again relates to connection, communication, and collaboration. And okay, so all of our listeners, if you can get your fingers typing, we're getting your brains moving, but now we're going to get your fingers typing. We want you to drop this into the chat, and we want this to be interactive. So pick one where you are personally weakest right now. Is it connection, communication, or collaboration? And
And,
so one of those three, and no hedging, and we want
and,
you to
and,
vote.
and Vegas rules apply. We're not going to share this with anybody else. We just want to we
Yeah.
want to get a sense of where it's at for you. So,
So, but yeah,
okay.
so we do want to see it.
Great. We got a
Yeah.
couple of folks who will rename R. See, I noticed a little initial there. R has said connection. L has said connect. We got a couple of folks are into connection. And so while people are putting in things into the chat here around connection,
Yeah.
communication, collaboration, so it turned out the subtitle of my book is The Three Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. And these are
Mhm.
they: connection, communication, collaboration. And this came out of working with the fact is, if you think about it, all great leaders connect well, communicate well, and collaborate well, right? And so we are all over the map. Look at this. We've
Yeah.
got connection, but a lot of people with connection. We got collaboration, communication. And here's the thing is you're like, the model that I use for this are three concentric circles because
Yeah.
some people will go, oh, this thing, is this connection or collaboration? Yes, both.
Right.
Means these they all overlap and intersect. Now, for the purposes of learning, we like to separate them out. But the fact is they can be all interconnected and interrelated for sure. So if you're going, because clearly, it's hard to collaborate without having a sense of connection. And how do you collaborate without
Without
communicating?
communication.
So they are not three distinct entities. It's just more for us to start thinking about how can I be intentional? Because the fact is, if I said to you, go be a better leader, Bob, you're like,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
What would I do? As opposed if versus if I said, Bob, go be a better connector, and here's a bunch of tools to do
Mhm.
that. Be a better communicator. Here's a bunch of tools to do that. Be a better collaborator. Here's a bunch of tools to do that. Then suddenly you go, oh, that I can do that. And if you learn those skills, that
Yeah.
will net make you a better leader. And so we're going to take a look
Mhm.
at what some of those connection, communication, and collaboration skills are so that you
Yeah.
can do that.
So there is a smattering of absolutely everything. I see it looks like connection is in the lead if we were going to see that in a graph.
And no, I just want to call that out for a second. And that's probably no surprise. How
Yeah.
many of you, and you don't have to answer this, but just for a rhetorical question, how many of you think sometimes work would be so easy if it wasn't for the darn people? Whether those are your colleagues, your customers, right? So, right, because people are messy and complicated. So the fact is, whatever, we like to think, within, food production, I think that is my industry. That is your secondary industry. The fact is, your primary industry, you're in the human being business because everything gets done in and through people. Some people, I'm sure you've heard this expression, right? Where people say, this is what people say. This is the company logo says, people are our greatest asset or people are our greatest resource. I
Mhm.
call BS. People are not your greatest asset and your greatest resource. People are your company. Full stop.
Yeah.
Now, if you had that mindset, how would you shift how you approached working with people? Right? Because the fact is, if you're going to lead them, you have to care about their success. Because if they succeed, you succeed. And unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, the only way to get promoted, aka more power, more prestige, and more money, is
Yeah.
to become a leader of people. And if you don't care about people, that is a bad fit. That is a square peg in a round hole. And you have to decide, is this work? And you have great individual contributors, but they are not good around people. Keep them as individual contributors. And if you look in the mirror and go, what, I don't care about people, I don't like people that much, I'm just doing this because that's my way to get more money, your people can smell it out from a mile away. Sorry to
Right.
break it to just the way the same. And I say that because so can you, so can I. We know when people don't care about us, when they see us as just a means to an end, as a pair of hands without a brain, right?
Mhm.
That does not work in this world.
Okay, so you you mentioned Henry Ford,
Yeah.
and so that kind of leads into my next question. How much of this is generational versus like leadership fundamentals?
Great. So interesting. So a lot of people will over attribute to the differences. Like this is generational. Like, if you're older, you look at the younger folks, you're like, those people, they're so entitled. They want a corner office after 6 weeks, whatever. Right? Here's the thing. We can attribute this to generations. That's not the issue. It's not that people want different things. It's that they've been conditioned to expect different ways of working. Because at the fundamental, basic level, we all have the same fundamental human needs, right? And I write about this quite a bit. I call them, there's four human needs, and these are actually collaboration needs to work well. One is we all have a need for safety, right? So that's physical safety, fiscal safety, financial safety,
Yeah.
emotional safety, right? Psychological safety. We have to have safety, right? Because that's what unlocks trust. We also have a need for energy, that we want something to energize us. Certain, as you all know, certain things energize you, certain things drain you. And if you get drained and drained and drained, at a certain point, you're burned out. Right? We have a need for safety and energy. We have a need for ownership, this sense of autonomy, and that I also have a sense of agency and control over what I do. I have yet to meet a single person who said, I had this amazing boss, and what I loved about them is how much they used to micromanage me, right? Said nobody ever, right? So safety, energy, ownership, and then the last one is purpose. So we have a need for purpose. So that's true across generations. However, while we all have the same needs, how those needs show up and manifest and express themselves generationally are different. And so
Right.
we have different expectations. I'll give you a couple of examples of the differences in expectations. So, for example, the older generations are more comfortable with things moving more slowly. So it's their need for speed, right? Younger generations growing up, I mean, I've got a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old who are digital natives and like their ability to navigate technology. And they're way more comfortable with that interface than face to face. Let's sit down and talk things through, right? So differences on speed, that's one thing. Another one is around access. Older generations are more used to there being what we'll call the hierarchy or the chain of command. And if you don't like something, you go to your boss, you go to your bosses, like, and they go to, and you take it and you let the chain of command do its thing. Whereas the younger generations have grown up in a much flatter world where basically they've been given a lot more respect. Don't just think about this in terms of work. Think about it just in terms of how do we parent these days, right? In terms of, how many parents would consider, I'm actually friends with my kid. 30, 40, 50 years ago when you're parenting, it's like, my kid is not my friend. And again, I'm speaking, there's a bell curve here, right? Are there exceptions to this? Absolutely. But all of which to say access, this whole sense is very different. Also, in terms of autonomy, basically, and this, I look at this with my kids and young people today, I don't know if they've ever been bored in their entire life, right? Because there's always something else that you can click on, have instant access. So you can opt in and opt out very quickly. That rewires the brain in a different way. So a sense of autonomy. And also, they've been in a world where they've been getting continuous feedback on a regular basis, right? And they want to learn and grow and develop. So the fact is, these different expectations of things like speed, access, autonomy, and feedback, these are the ways they manifest differently generationally. And again, I'm speaking in a bell curve. You can have people who are from older generations who also want speed, but I'm kind of speaking more in trends. And so thinking about that, but underneath the way those express, we all want safety, we all want energy, we all want ownership, and we all want purpose.
Yeah, let's dive in, and this is fascinating. I mean, I'm excited to get into these each bucket here. And
Hmm.
the first one is described as connection.
Yeah.
And what would you say is something that leaders think builds connection, but actually does the opposite?
Oh, I love this question. So if you think about it, right? So leaders, one of the things as leaders we have to learn how to do, it isn't about, and I love you said, like, what do leaders think versus that
Yeah.
does the opposite? Because one of the gaps that we need to close is the gap between intention and perception. At the end of the day, people
Mhm.
don't care what you intended. Well, I mean well. I mean, yes, leadership is a relationship. And at its core, the person who is the judge and the quality of that relationship is the person who chooses to follow you. So it isn't like, well, I don't understand. I was being clear. Like, yeah, you thought you were being clear, but what do they think? It's all about
Mhm.
them. And so we have to build things from their agenda. So I want to share a few things to Bob's question of what are things that leaders think they build connection. So one is checking in all the time, right? Right? Like, oh yeah, like I'm going to check in a lot, right? What this is, like I care about you. I'm checking in all the time. What this really is, it's micromanagement in disguise, right? We've all experienced it, right? We all had an immediate emotional relationship to that, like. So, are you really checking in? And one thing to do also as leaders, we think we have to have the answers. Oh, I want to check in with you all the time. Like maybe you should ask your people, hey, I want to make sure that you feel supported. And at the same time, I don't want you to feel micromanaged. So what would be a good cadence for us to check in? Now, there's no right answer to that. For some people, depending on the job and the task, it might be every hour. For other people, it'll be like, I'm good every couple of weeks and everything in between, right? So you can talk about that. You don't have to guess. I think so many of us in leadership roles think we have to have the answers. It's like, no, you can ask your people what they need and they'll tell you, but you have to believe in them and trust them to do that. So one is checking in all the time. Oh, another thing, this happens a lot too, is leaders, because we feel valuable when we can fix things and have the answers. So jumping straight to solutions. So somebody comes to you like, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. And you say, well, you should just do that, right? You have taken away, you've robbed them of the opportunity to solve something on their own, right? And so it's so easy. I mean, how many of us, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but one of my colleagues calls it the advice monster, right? Notice the advice monster comes roaring out because it makes you feel important and I'm competent and I'm showing them how great and smart I am. People, you already have the job. Like, that's not your job. Your job is to coach and develop other people. I'm sure you've heard the expression, give a person a fish, feed him for a day. Teach them how to fish, feed them for a lifetime. When you jump into answer mode, you're giving them a fish. And they're like, thanks for the fish. And also, they're going to become dependent on you. Oh, look, you give me fish all the time. They're not going to learn how to fish for themselves because you have enabled them to stay stuck in that place. Oh, another place, that connection where we think we are. It's like, oh, I don't want to upset them, which is another, we can also call that conflict avoidant, right? Where you're avoiding tough conversations, right? You know that you do it, right? And what this does is it creates elephants in the room that don't get addressed. And so it's just really important to be clear on how that plays out. So that's just a few examples. Again, just to recap those, checking in all the time, which is really micromanaging, jumping to solutions, having that advice monster jump into things, and avoiding those tough conversations.
And so from your from your experience of meeting with different companies every week, every month,
Yeah.
and meeting with leaders, how many, as you poll them or interacting with them, how many feel that their team is truly connected?
Oh, I think we tend to feel this is the old 80-20 rule, right? So 80% of leaders are like, oh yeah, we do a good job connecting. But if you ask their team, and that's where the proof is in the pudding, which is why, by the
Mhm.
way, if you want to get better as a leader, number one thing I recommend to all the people that I train and coach is get some honest feedback from other people. Whether that's a 360 instrument, whatever, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can just do it as like, what can I be doing better? So 80% of leaders say, yeah, I'm doing a good job connecting. Turns out only 20% of people feel connected. So there's this gap. It turns out that we need to spend more energy working to connect with people. And by the way, when we're connecting, I'm not just talking about connecting on the tasks. It's actually the biggest place where this falls short is we need to connect with people as a human being, right? Just like who are you? Like, I don't want to see you as a box or a number on the org chart. It's like, who are you as a person? What are your interests outside of work? Are you married? Are you not married? Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? What are your hobbies? Like, just that you take an interest of me as a person. When you start to do it, it unlocks people. It's an unlock. And you might think, oh, but that's not what we're here to do. That is the work of leadership. Or you might be thinking to yourself, I don't have time for that small talk BS. That's the work. Right
Yeah.
now, there are ways to do that. I mean, I know the fear and the danger is like, oh, we're going to go off and we're not going to get any work done. Put a timer on and ask a couple of pointed questions. You'd be blown away with how quickly you can connect with someone. And also, you can also create boundaries around this. I have a tool. We're not going to go into it today necessarily. It might be in the toolkit. There's like 3 questions that you can ask for your teams as a check-in. And you can time, you say, everyone gets a minute. And then we're going to raise a hand and ask you to stop. 3 questions, before you start your team meetings. By the way, you can do the same 3 questions on a one-on-one as well. So the first question is, how are you feeling today? And by the way, you can't answer fine. Fine is a placeholder for let's move on. Right? No, like, now how are you really feeling? And by the way, since the pandemic, people have been primed to actually answer this more genuinely. So, how are you feeling is the first question. The second question is, what's distracting you or what's on your mind? They're not going to solve this in a minute, but maybe there's something going on at home. Maybe such as, I got a kid who's sick and I had a hard time getting childcare for them today, right? Or maybe it's, We just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. It doesn't matter what it is. And then you're not going to fix or solve this. It's just giving people a chance to voice
Good voice it.
what is going on. People want to feel like they're being seen and heard and valued. It's so basic. And the third question is, how can I, if it's one-on-one or if it's in a group, how can we support you? And just when you ask that, you can do all three answers to that question in a minute, right? And
Mhm.
when you do that, what it does from a neuroscience perspective, I'm not going to, if you want to geek out with me offline, we can do it. But basically, in a nutshell, what you do when you allow people to speak the answers to those three questions, it actually gets them to show up and arrive. It
Yeah.
calms their
Right.
central nervous system
Right.
down. And what they can do is they can be more present. So it's actually an investment in productivity. So if
Mhm.
you started
Mhm.
seeing it as, oh, I'm investing in their productivity because people only do their best work when they feel better, right? And don't just take my word on this, folks. I want
Yeah.
you to, here's a rhetorical question for you. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about, and actually put the answers to this in the chat if you would. I want you to think about your best days at work, like days you are just crushing it, where you just feel like we are just rocking it. We are crushing, work's getting done. It is an awesome day. Put into the chat, please, what are the kind of words you would use to describe how you're feeling at those moments? Like on a day that you're crushing it, how would you describe how you're feeling on those days? Just go ahead and put your answers in the chat. One word I've heard is like energized, right? So that's my
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
So let's see what people have to say. So what's your word in the chat? On the days that you're crushing it, how do you feel on those days? Here's the prompt. Yep. Thank you. We got engaged. Laughing. I love that.
Uh-huh.
Fun. Laughing. That's so
Uh-huh.
good. Let's see what else we have coming in. Just a word. It doesn't have to be a novel. You can just put a word in, folks. There we go. Accomplished. Thank you. So as more words are coming in, I want you to notice something about the quality of all these words. All the words that you're describing so far, and we'll see if we get a few more. All the words you've described have a certain amount of energy. Yeah,
Yeah.
Erica's just said peppy. Like peppy is not like, oh, I'm chill. I'm like there's a quantity to the energy, and the other
Mhm.
quality and centered and clear. Thank you. So the other quality of these words beyond big, like there's a quantity. The
Yeah.
qualities, they're all positive words, right?
Right.
Empowered,
Right.
centered and clear, peppy. No one has put in the chat, wow, the days that I'm crushing it, I feel frustrated. I feel anxious. I feel
Right.
depressed and hopeless. So as leaders, we want to create environments where people can feel peppy and centered and cleared and empowered and accomplished. Because when you do that, people can do their best work. So I like to say that we're all CEOs. And what I mean by that is you're all chief energy officers. Like, what do you do to manage the energy of the people around you? Help them to create an environment where they can thrive. And part of that has to go back to safety, energy, ownership, and purpose. So anyway, that's a long answer to
Yeah.
your question. But
So,
but it's so valuable, right? Just to realize these are the things that as leaders we
yeah.
shape, right? And if
Mhm.
you ever worked for a boss that was, we call them vampires, right? They suck your energy. Even before you get there, you have the Sunday scaries. Right? It's like, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. Like,
Yeah.
your stomach gets tied up in knots. There's been research that has shown that a bad boss, the likelihood of you having a cardiac incident goes up. I mean, bad bosses will kill us. And so if you're someone else's boss, you're having that impact on them, whether you know it or not. And so what are you doing to be able to do that?
Okay, so we're about to switch into the second section. And but before we do that, and before we do that, this is already fascinating on a lot of levels. And again, as Alain is speaking, and if you have other questions that are starting to bubble up to the top of your mind, go ahead and just enter those in the chat as they come to you. And then so before we leave this section, I wanted to see maybe if you wanted to give people like a takeaway tool. And what would that be just before we move out of connection?
Yeah.
What would be a takeaway tool for them to think
Yeah,
about?
I think that the takeaway tool, and we've touched on it already, is that check-in, right? It's just, and look, you don't have to use those three questions, but the tool would be, I need to connect and check in with people as people before I get into them as checking in as employees, right? So,
Mhm.
and I'm sure some of you are doing something like this right now, but like to not give it lip service, like, hey, how's it going? Fine, and moving on. It's actually to take a moment, like, hey, what's going on? And you can ask questions, like, and ask good, provocative, open-ended questions, such as like, so what was the most fun thing that happened this weekend? You don't know what the answer is. You don't need to know, but they do. What's the most fun thing that's happening? What's going on? You can, I'm sure you've done things like this with your groups too. Like, what's the first concert you ever went to? Like, if you're in a group setting, just to get to
Yeah.
know people. Like, people want to be seen. So I'd say the tool is check in with your people. And again, you're welcome to use those three questions of how are you feeling? What's distracting you? And how can I support you?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that already brings us to your next concentric circle. Now that you've got that in my brain, and it fits pretty nicely. And that's communication.
Yeah.
And so here we're going to switch again. We just asked you for more in the chat, and now we're going to come right back to everyone who's online with us and ask you what communication challenge do you see on your team or involving your team right now? And again, we would ask you to just
Pick one.
engage with us and just share.
Pick, just pick one. I know you
Yeah.
may have more than one.
Yeah, but anything
Yeah.
you want to share with us
Yeah.
in regard
Yeah.
to communication challenge?
Yeah, while we're waiting for the chat to
Yeah.
populate here, as one thing I certainly have asked, and I've polled and surveyed many organizations over the years, and I asked them, what are the biggest challenges that you have at work? And communication is almost always in the top three and usually number one, right? Because we can usually, it's also the of connection, communication, and collaboration. I think communication is the one that seems the most easily traceable to like, oh, there was the problem. We can go, oh,
Mhm.
that's the problem there. Like someone didn't hear that, oh, you got that wrong. And we can go back and go, oh, that was the mistake. So in some ways, it's more visible. So.
Mhm.
There we go. All right. Communication challenges. We got one going on. All right. Passive aggressive behavior, avoiding conflict, delivering, yeah, difficult feedback. Thank you for that, Amy. It's not uncommon in that,
Mhm.
so many, I say, if you look at North American culture, we definitely over-index on conflict avoidant rather than overly aggressive. I mean, you do have those cases too, but certainly that is something that we go into. Let's see what else we have here. So.
Wow.
Oh,
This,
right. Oh, getting
this,
leaders to share information downward. Yeah, that's a good one. That's probably has something to do with people withholding information, not recognizing that other people need to
mhm.
know what they know. Issues where communication is not properly relayed. Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, distractive. Oh, opinions. Yeah,
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 versus the facts.
opinions versus clear facts. Yeah, and I'm sure many people too, in terms of opinions versus facts. We were talking about this before we got on camera today, is just the sense of, have you noticed that like people seem to love drama? Like there's just organizational drama in politics, and people want to like if you're not with me, you're against me. And this happened to me. Can you believe they did that? And suddenly, we have the he said, she said. We have the who was the victim, who was the perpetrator, who did this, and things get and that no one's actually had a conversation to actually find out what's going on, and people aren't being direct. So we start triangulating, and
Right.
this sucks so much of the energy out of things. Okay, understanding what the priorities are. Yeah, from our leadership. Thank you for that, Craig. And I'm curious around priorities. I wonder if some of you can resonate with this because I've certainly seen it with clients that I work with around priorities. I was actually recently at a company State of the Union where the CEO spoke before I did. I was giving the opening keynote, and the CEO, when he was talking about the company looking forward, he talked about their 18 strategic priorities. Now, I don't know if you all know how many priorities, like literally speaking, you can have. The answer is one. That's why I call it this the priority. Now I'll let you go with maybe two, but 18. So this, yeah. Look, if everything is important, then nothing is important. And again, and what I think many of us, particularly in mid-level leadership
Um,
roles, feel like is we are a servant to many masters. Like one person saying this is important, someone else is saying this is important. It's like, where am I supposed to spend my time? So yeah, needing to be popular. Thank you for this, Shauna, instead of an honest conversation for growth. Yeah, it's interesting distinction between being nice and being kind, right? Nice is where you want to be polite and everything, but kind, giving people honest, tough feedback is kind because that's going to help them grow. Now, you have to risk the fact that someone might not like you or get defensive. But here's the thing about leadership is we have to have the courage to be uncomfortable. Leaders have to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's just the nature of it. And anytime you think, oh, someone should really do this, and you point the finger at everybody else, I invite you to take out the mirror and point it at you. Because, like, what can you do? Because that is your agency. And the more that you can exercise that muscle of what can I do right now? I'm gonna speak up in this situation. I'm gonna give that feedback. Now I can give it gracefully and tactfully. If someone did something poorly, I don't have to go over them and say, "Hey, Bob, by the way, you suck." Like That is not the way to give it. But it's like if Bob does something poorly, it's like, Bob, would you be open to some feedback? Well, here's something that I think would make it even better if in the next time. But again, how many of you on this call right now have had really great role models of people who give feedback exceptionally well? My guess is few. And it's
Mhm.
very hard to do something when you've never seen it modeled, right? Which is partially why I come in and teach these skills and we start
Mhm.
practicing these in learning labs, etc. So anyway, these are great. Thank you for these answers in the chat.
And you, okay, so circling really quick back to your leader with the 18 strategic points.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what's something that leaders say all the time that you find creates confusion instead of clarity?
I just wrote an article on this too, so this is perfect timing. Which is on my website too. It's in my blog. It's a blog post if you want to go find it on alainhunkins.com. So yeah, like oftentimes there are so many common phrases, and you've all heard all of these, I'm sure. And these create confusion rather than clarity. So one is when people say, "Hey, let's circle back." Right? Yeah, let's circle back. What are you actually saying there? Like what you think you're saying is we're going to revisit this, but what people hear is this has gone somewhere to die. Like there's no owner, there's no timing, it's just delayed, right? That's one thing. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing that creates a lot of not just confusion, but also creates a lot of stress. I need this ASAP, right? What you think this is important and what people hear, because one of the things we haven't talked about is in organizations, there's hierarchy. And when someone above you wants something from you, a lot of us, and I have too, we jump, right? So what we hear
Yeah.
when the ASAP is we drop everything, but I don't really know how urgent this is. So basically, what we're doing is we're creating a stress signal. And if you want to really tick people off, tell them that you need something immediately. And then later on, they find out that you're immediate. They actually had more time. And so I've had
Yeah.
clients who've talked about, yeah, I stayed late that night. I canceled plans. And it turns out it wasn't that urgent. So that's another one. Another thing is when leaders say, "Oh, keep me posted," right? What you think you're saying is, "Oh, stay in communication." What people hear from that is, "I actually have no idea what you actually want from me," right? So think about it. Vague directions create vague execution. And so I'd say the rule of thumb around all of this is how do we create more specificity in what we're saying? Because if things can be misinterpreted, they will be misinterpreted. And there's also, at the end of this webinar, I would like you all to banish two words from your business lexicon vocabulary. And these are the two words. It's obvious. Right? Think about it. There's only one person that anything is ever obvious to, and that is to yourself.
Yeah.
Anything else, and I'm sure you've all had the experience of like, how could they have misunderstood me? I thought I was being perfectly clear. Yes, you thought that, but clearly they didn't get it, which means that you weren't perfectly clear. And you can blame and shame all day long, but the goal of communication isn't communication. The goal of communication is to create shared understanding so people can take the appropriate action. And if you keep that end in mind, you do whatever you need to do to get that person to that goal. And if it feels like a lot of extra work, it is sometimes. But the more that we get better at this and put guardrails into place, we can do something about it.
So earlier, kind of near the beginning, we talked about generations and the difference
Yeah.
between generations, and you shared a few examples, but is this area in communication where you find generation gaps kind of show the most?
I don't know if I'd say the most, but these definitely show up a lot, right? I
Mhm.
can't say like the stamp of the most approval, but
Yeah.
what I can say is, with the older generations around leadership, so much of this had to do with FaceTime. It was just like, in terms of, just kind of having this sense of like FaceTime is support, and also this older generation too was much less comfortable with with kind of just interrupting someone and like asking for clarification, right? It was sort of like, this is told, now your job is to figure it out on your own, but don't go back. So information and communication was much more one way. Whereas with the younger generations, there's much more of, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Can you clarify what this means for me? Hopefully, they're doing more of that. So just understanding how that plays out. And also another thing to consider generationally too is now this is I think universal. I'd say both younger and older generations in the workplace. are all pretty conflict avoidant, right? And very few people are very skilled around this. Now, some people might be more conflict avoidant in person. Some people might be more conflict avoidant on text, different technologies. However, conflict avoidant is big, and very few people have had really good, healthy role models of how to navigate conflict skillfully in any generation. I mean, that is an area. If you can get that figured out, you are so far ahead than a lot of other
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure, that's some of the places that the differences generationally.
Okay, so one question is right here, and it's there are all these right ways of doing things in terms of feedback, check-in,
Hmm.
communication. How do you remember to apply these when they don't come naturally?
Oh, I love this
Um,
question. Thank you. Is that in the
what have
chat?
you done to try and keep these tips and tricks at the front of your mind
Gotcha.
dealing with people?
Thank
I
you.
would be writing them on my hand.
Marcus, thank you for this question. This is an awesome, awesome question. So here's the thing is, like in a webinar, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a fire hose today. And so to answer your question, Marcus, I'd like you all to consider, have you ever set New Year's resolutions? Right? Because this is what we're talking about, changing behavior, right? Ultimately, we're changing leadership behavior. Most people say, yeah, I set New Year's resolutions a long time ago, but I stopped doing it because they don't work. And why they tend to not work is for a couple of reasons, but this will tie into your question, Marcus. Is like what we tend to do is we get over ambitious. I want to change everything all at once. Right. So yeah, I know. Thank you, Stephen. Stephen just put in the chat, PS, thanks for the fire hose. Yeah, I only have an hour with you, so I'm trying to give you, I mean, look, here's the thing. The answer comes down to habits. And I'm a big fan. If you're not familiar, there's a couple of books. They're related to each other, one built on the back of the others. One is called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, who's a professor at Stanford. And one of his disciples was a guy named James Clear, who you probably know, Atomic Habits, which blew up as a giant bestseller. So the whole principle of habit formation is don't take on too much, right? Take on one thing at a time and so give yourself the runway. So, Marcus, to your question, like a lot of these things, pick one thing. Okay, I want to get better at feedback. You got to practice that and use that, and then just build that in. Like, okay, so for example, here's another tool for everybody. Bonus tool that I don't think there's anything in any of the documents about this. So this is a thing, this is a structure I use when I teach feedback. It's called plus EBI. So the idea of plus, let's say I was giving Bob some feedback about, let's say Bob did a presentation, I was going to give him some feedback afterwards. So the plus is, hey, Bob, this was a plus. This was things that you did well. And I want to share these with him. Okay, so Bob, like for example, you got a really clear central message. Like you had some clear supporting points. Like these are the things that went well. You seemed very confident and you made good eye contact with the audience. And these are pluses. And then the EBI pieces, and Bob, what would make it even better if next time is you had too many examples, and I think that your examples brought people off on tangents, etc. So you notice by framing it as even better from the future, Bob can hear the feedback because I'm not saying, Bob, you sucked at this. You should have done this because Bob can't go back and replay the past. But what he can do is change things in the future. So anyway, if you want, we could do a whole feedback workshop for you all, but that's just one tool. So Marcus, going back to your questions, pick one tool, practice it, get a level of proficiency and then skill where you feel like I've got this under my belt, and then I can move on to something else. To use an analogy, some of you, I'm sure, have exercised at some point in your life. You know how you have certain exercises that you go to because you're comfortable, they're kind of in your zone, so you do them. Like, so for me, for example, I'm like pretty good at doing stuff on my back. But my hamstrings are perennially tight and I don't stretch them out enough. And I know I need to, but I don't really have a good habit of doing so. And so I have to get into the habit. And it's like, so the same idea of behavior change that you would take on a personal habit level works with a leadership habit. These are all skills and behaviors, Marcus. And so you can learn them. But yeah, just one thing at a time and then pick the ones that you want to focus on. And the other thing I'd recommend is get an accountability buddy. Tell somebody else that you're working on this stuff. Too often, I think we think that personal and professional development has to be done in the secrecy and privacy of our own home, which is why, and that is such a load of, it's a load.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
load of stuff. I'll say it that way today. It is a load. And so get a buddy, get support. Tell people I'm working on this and can you support me on this? Tell your team you're working on stuff and let them support you. Take the weight off this idea. We tend to think that we have to do all this in the privacy of our own home. And the fact is, again, I'll use a different athletic example. If you think about every major athlete, I don't know if you all heard in the London Marathon a few weeks ago, two runners broke the 2 minute sorry, not 2 minute, 2 hour marathon. They're both two Kenyan runners. They both have a coach from France who live in Kenya and trains with them. The top performers have coaches. Coaches give you feedback. Coaches support you. Why do you think you're supposed to figure this out on your own? So anyway, that's my soapbox. I'm going to get off it. Thank you for the question, Marcus.
Okay, so we're about to jump into our third section, which is collaboration. And once again, continue any other questions that bubble up. Please go ahead and share them, and we appreciate those, and we'll weave them right in, as you can see.
Yes.
Okay, so in the area of collaboration, where do silos, where do you find that silos show up that actually that hurt performance?
Gotcha. So just to be clear, let's do a little level setting before I answer the question. What are
Yeah.
silos, right? To make sure we're all clear that silos are when different, usually vertical functional areas stick to each other and we don't have that horizontal
Hmm.
integration between
Hmm.
things. So an example would be like sales is not talking to marketing, is not talking to operations, you get the idea, right? So,
Yeah.
right. So and people will oftentimes blame generational differences for silos. Look, silos are not a people problem generally. They tend to be a design problem. There's a wonderful quote from a guy named Edward Deming, who years ago said, if you put a good person in a bad system, the bad system will win every time. Let me give you an example of this. I was brought in to work with a sales team with a manufacturing organization. And what I was told is they said, we need our salespeople to be more collaborative with each other. I said, okay, fine, fair enough. And so in this first intake call, I asked the senior executives who ran the sales function, I said, great, thank you. You want them to be more collaborative. Tell me about the sales compensation plan. Why do you need to know about that? Because just, yeah. So anyway, you can probably imagine where the story is going. Turns out the way the compensation plan was structured, they were completely incentivized to compete against each other, then collaborate. So no, they weren't sharing information. No, they weren't divulging best practices because that would have hurt the way they would have been bonused. So guess what? You can't fix a systems problem at the people level. So let's talk about this in terms of silos, right? So one is, and someone brought this up as one of the big communication challenges, which is misaligned priorities. So what ends up happening, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, is that teams optimize for their own goals, much in the same way the salespeople optimize for their individuals. Teams do the same thing. So teams can optimize for their own goals instead of the organization goals, right? So it's like, well, we did
Hmm.
fine last quarter. It's like, yeah, you did fine, but the organization is not doing well. So these silos will create not just separation, they create competition. So yeah, we can win locally, but the business will lose globally. So that's one place. Another thing, and this came up in our communication challenge as well, so you can see this is related to collaboration, is information hoarding, right? People don't share information. So that means, of course, when people don't share context or
Hmm.
data or decisions that are being made, that means that everyone else is left in the dark, right? So when people don't have the full picture, they can't make better decisions. And what they end up doing is they make safer decisions based on the limited information they have. And in most organizations, you're way better off doing something that keeps you from sticking your neck out because generally that gets punished less than a big, big mistake. So that's another one. Another third area where certainly design problems hit silos is that we look at the way the systems are designed, there are places for things to fall through the cracks, right? So work moves from one team to another, and then things get dropped, things get delayed, things get redone, right? So silos will show up the gaps. And unless someone is rising up and taking a look at the overall business process and mapping out, so this handoff here, what's going on, all this stuff, this is where work slows down, errors increase, and accountability disappears. Just to give you an example of this, this is one of my favorite examples. So I'm talking to you today out of my home office. I work out of here. And like many of you, I have internet and I have cell phone. And there was a time that I was working with the same provider that was providing my internet and cell phone. And I was having issues with both of them relatively at the same time. And for whatever reason, I had a line technician from the cell phone company out here on the property while I was dealing with stuff. And so then he was outside, but for some reason, what I can remember all of this because it felt a little like I was in a Twilight Zone episode. At one point, I had a customer service rep person from the company's headquarters, customer service, on a line. And then I was holding up a phone to the line tech who was outside, and I was intermediating this entire call. So that's just an example of like, do you realize how insane this is that you have a customer who's basically like supporting you all? And I'm sure you've all had this, or you call someone up and they're like, "Oh, that's not our department. You have to call them back. Like you're the fifth person I talked to today." So again, just being able to do that. So if you basically, in a nutshell, if you want to know where silos are hurting you, don't look at the org charts. Look at where the priorities clash. Like look at where people are saying, "I don't know." Look at where work is slowing down. Like those things will reveal themselves very quickly, and then you can do something about it. So that's the place to go.
So we're already on, let's pretend like today's Wednesday, which it is. But the next question for you, and maybe this relates to jumping into next Monday already, is people get
Hmm.
excited about using some of these tools. Where should someone start next week to
Great.
start improving collaboration?
Great. I'm going to say start tomorrow, actually, or start this afternoon because you can tell I'm already breaking a sweat in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the thing around collaboration, and I'm gonna kind of hark back to something I said earlier. I
Mhm.
think many of us in leadership tend to think we have to have the answers. I would say that in terms of the place to start around collaboration is go on this, depending on your scope. This might be either a small or large listening tour. And I'm not looking for you to like spend hours and hours asking people questions, but basically the question you want to ask and have answered is, what can we be doing differently around here that would help you to do your job better? Or some variation of that is asking people, what could make things better around here? Right? Or whether it's, or what's the thing that frustrates you the most, and how can we support you in trying to remedy that? Basically, it doesn't matter the exact question, but the intention behind it is I am curious and open to hearing from you about how things could be improved. That is what you're trying to get to. It's interesting. I interviewed a guy. He's now retired. And I interviewed him a couple of years ago. So his company, they are a mid-sized company. They make swimming pools and spas in Florida. It's called Team Horner, and the CEO's name is Dr. Bill Kent. And Team Horner, a few years ago, won the award from the American Psychological Association for the most psychologically healthy workplace in all of America for the company of that
Wow.
size. Right, so
Mhm.
that's a big award. So I got to interview him for an article because I've been a Forbes contributor for a while, and so I interviewed Dr. Bill Kent, and I said, so the question I asked him was this. I said, look, if another organization wants to not necessarily win the award, but if they want to become a more psychologically healthy workplace, where would you tell them to start? Which is kind of the question you asked me, Bob. Like, what should I do on Monday? And his answer is like, it's easy. Ask your people. They'll tell you. People aren't stupid. They know what's going on. So I think for many of us as leaders, we tend to think not only do we have to have the answers, but we have to be this kind of parental, figure that has like is going to take care of everyone. We're all leading adults, folks, right? Unless well, hopefully you're leading adults, right? What's amazing is how many people don't act like it at work because we've created systems where they are kind of dependent on us for all sorts of things, including information, decisions. And in this world of work, that takes a lot of time. And we just don't have that kind of time. Like that is very
Right.
old school leadership. We need to move towards this place of empowering your people. And the way to start empowering your people is by getting to know them. Not just earlier we had connection as a person. This is about connecting them as an employee. What do you need to do your job better? Because they know their work better than you do, and they always will.
Mhm.
So that's where I would start. I'd say start asking your people, go on that listening tour, and then act on the information that you get. That is because that's what's going to put some trust or deposits in the emotional bank account, as Stephen Covey would say. I love that analogy. Is the sense of, yeah, when you show people what do you need, and then you help them get it, they're like, this person's got my back. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I for I still see the fire hose comment here. For all of you who want it, Alain has shared handouts, a link to his website with tools. And so if you go back to the top of our chat, you'll see that. But before we leave this section, um, to another way to boil it down to a practical tool, if they were going to do one thing this afternoon, and you kind of you talked about that, but
Hmm.
what and any other thoughts that come to mind for what they should do?
Yeah, I'm going to share another thing. This is a communication tool that people have found incredibly useful, and it's super simple, right? Because we talked about the fact that communication, the goal is not communication, it's understanding. And so
Mhm.
the tool is what I call ask for a receipt. And what I mean by that is a receipt of understanding. Let me just give you a little context on this. So if you think about what are receipts, right? Receipts are proof or confirmation of a completed transaction. And if it's an important transaction, you're getting a receipt, right? You might buy a pack of gum and not get a receipt, but I can guarantee you, you're not buying a car and not getting a receipt, right? Or whatever else. So if you think about it, at work, asking for a receipt is getting confirmation of a completed transaction. And here's a great example for you. And this actually comes from what is the quick service restaurant industry. I've been told they are not called the fast food industry, they're the quick service restaurant. So some of us, like myself, are old enough to remember this. So right around 1980, 1981 is when all those restaurants started putting drive-throughs through the restaurants. And the first 6 months, the drive-through process was a nightmare. It was very common. People would go up and order their food. They'd go up to pick it up, and the order would be wrong, filled with mistakes. And this went on for months and months and months.
Mhm.
And then finally, about 6, 7 months in, the drive-through mistake rates started to plummet. You want to know what the big fix was? Again, this is 1980, 1981. So this was not like they had some great computer technology.
Yeah,
The,
right.
the quick fix was they started having the employee repeat the order back to the
Mhm.
customer before they'd make it, right? So it's like, I order two cheeseburgers, two medium fries, two colas. They go, two cheeseburgers, three. No, no, I didn't say three. I said two. And we catch it, we nip it in the bud. And then so the error rates, did they go to zero? No. But did they drop significantly? Yes. How often do you have meetings and we all go through, we share a lot of good information about here's our plans and we're going to do this and we go through this, all great. Everyone clear? And everyone, of course, says, yes, I'm clear. And then we go. And later on, we find out, oh, maybe that wasn't as clear as we need. So to take asking for receipt is to go around, and you can do this as you turn this into a habit. To go back to Marcus's question, if we turn this into a tool I want to practice, okay, let's just before we leave, let's just go around. What's everyone understanding of what's the action that you're taking, right? Some of us do this already, some of us don't. Some of us do this sometimes, but not all the time. So, how can you turn this into a consistent leadership habit? How do you confirm and validate understanding on both sides, right? You all know
Yeah.
the old carpenter's maxim, right? Measure twice, cut once. This is all about measuring twice to make sure that everyone is aligned. And look, if Taco Bell will do this for a $3 Crunchwrap Supreme, don't you think that your work is worth the same amount of value?
Yeah, yeah. So we are coming down the home stretch. We have about 7 minutes left. Again, if you have a question, please shoot it to us again in the chat. I wanted to ask
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated both by two topics. One is coming out of the pandemic. What changes did you see in leadership, and what impacts or what wrinkles have you seen? And then the second question is how are you seeing AI impact leaders, and how leadership acts performs?
Yeah. Oh, these are two ginormous questions. Let's take them one at a time, shall we? Because I can't. So the pandemic. Okay, so I think the pandemic, I'd say if there was a silver lining to the pandemic, I think it's what we sound like we kind of burst the bubble, the mirage that people did not have lives outside of work, right? Think about it, right? Suddenly, if you were in a situation where people were working from home, you had their Zoom screens, they had babies crying in the background, cats walking, like you realized, oh, we all have these lives. And there's something about the fact that I think before the pandemic, we could sort of dissociate and pretend like that was just background noise. Now you're here and that, and we don't do that anymore. And I think one of the things that I've noticed, and this was true in the pandemic, like how to lead through the pandemic and beyond, I think the future is going to belong to leaders who understand that to succeed in today and tomorrow's world, you need to be exceedingly human, right? And so what does that mean? That means leaning into being a better connector. being a better communicator, being a better collaborator, realizing you are in the human being business and you have to understand you don't need to be a licensed psychologist. What you have to do is care about people and find ways to show them that you care in a way that they feel that you care and that they get it. And by the way, when I say care, I realize, I mean, another word that we use sometimes around that is empathy. Empathy is great, and empathy only works well when it's done in concert with accountability. So it's a both and. You have to have clear boundaries and be fierce because you're running a business. You're not running an adult daycare center,
Yeah.
right? So I get that you can't be like, oh yeah, your cat is sick. Take 2 months off, fully paid. We'll take care. No, I get it, but so it's a both and. So I would say leaning in terms of the pandemic, lean into being exceedingly human. And I'll give you another example. I was just talking to a coaching client yesterday, and in their company, they last year they got big. They just came out with their it's on their fiscal year. They just come out. It's bonus season in terms of the yearly bonuses and merit increases. Last year they got these big increases, big bonuses. This year, as in her words, crappy, right? So crappy. She decided she was going to tell every single one of her direct reports, do that in person live to give them a chance to hear it from her directly and to give them a chance to respond. Her boss let everyone know via email, right? So just think about the impact. Now, again, which is faster and more, you could say what's well,
Right.
sending it via email is more efficient. Nothing's changed, right? No, it isn't a question of the change. It's a question of what's the impact on the employee in terms of engagement, in terms of loyalty, in terms of feeling like you care about me. Just thinking about how do we do things. And I think unfortunately, it's very easy to look at the business press and go like, "Oh, so and so company just laid off 7,000 people via email. If they can do it, so can I." Look, at the end of the day, or people will say to me like, "Hey, everything you're describing here, that's not how Elon Musk leads." Like, you have to decide for yourself what kind of leader you want to be. What is in concert with your values? And you get to decide that. But if you decide that actually people that you care about people and that valuing people is a fundamental human trait that's important to you, then you'll do these things. And if you don't care, and then you won't. And people will know about that. And it's also a question to consider too is how do you measure success? Because P&L is only one metric of success, right? As leaders, you leave a legacy for people, right? People will remember the kind of boss that you were. And they not only remember, they talk about it. They go on their families and they talk about you at the dinner table. And how do I know that? Because you talk about your boss at the dinner table with your family. This is what we do. I mean, as social primates, which humans are, we have this need to find our place in our tribes. So anyway, pandemic, be exceedingly human. And when it comes to I would say be curious and keep learning. I took a 6-week lead with AI course in June of last year. So this is like 11. It feels hopelessly out of date.
Wow.
I was learning prompts on how to like prompt engineering.
Yeah.
Well, we're moving from generative AI to agentic AI. So what I'm realizing is I need to keep learning. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the expression like you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use it. What AI is going to be a serious power tool, right? Think about the difference between using a screwdriver and a power drill or a screw gun, right? Just think about how much speed, right? So this is a power tool and it's going to power tool and revolutionize and change industries. Learn about it. Don't be afraid of it. It's all learnable. And in fact, one of the places you can learn about it is you can go to AI and say, help me understand how you work. And like whatever, like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you use, you can use it to start learning and give yourself some patience and on-ramp. But I feel constantly behind and I probably know more than 95% of the population. So if you take even the leap of going, I need to be curious and spend a little time learning, you'll be ahead of most people who are basically putting their head in the sand. And it's whether we like it or not, it's coming, right? There used to be a thriving business on harvesting ice from lakes, right? Where'd that business go? So, you know, keep up with change. So those are my answers to your questions there.
Okay, so we're almost at time. Before we go though, can you share just one last takeaway for connection, communication, collaboration?
Yeah, I will say the takeaway is lead. This is a more broad overall one. Leadership is a journey of constant and never-ending improvement, right? If you want to keep growing, in fact, the other thing about this, leadership development is personal development. You can only max your ceiling as a leader is your ceiling as a person. And so these have ripple benefits in
Mhm.
every aspect of your life. So I would say keep on the track of continuous learning, which is sort of like the AI theme, but it's true in
Mhm.
everything, is keep learning. And as I said earlier, too, get feedback and surround yourself with people that you admire and want to learn from. And it might cost you money at times, but this is an investment in yourself. One of my mentors said, work harder on yourself than you do on your job, because that is where exponential dividends come from. So that's what my encouragement would be. So
Wow,
thanks.
that's really well said. Um, okay, so before we wrap up today's discussion, I want to invite everyone to join us and join. When I say us, that means FPSA on Wednesday, June 3rd at 11:30 Eastern for an upcoming FPSA webinar called "From Legacy to Leading Edge: Dairy Plant Modernization Strategies." FPSA takes a practical look at how dairy manufacturers are modernizing legacy facilities through automation, operational upgrades, and smart investment strategies, all to improve efficiency, consistency, and long-term competitiveness. If dairy operations, modernization planning, or automation strategy are on your radar, we hope you'll join FPSA for what should be a very practical and insight-driven conversation. So thank you to everyone. And Alan, Alan,
No worries. See, it happens.
I've already seen so many great comments here,
Great.
thanking you for this great information. And
My
I
pleasure,
enjoyed
Bob. And it's a pleasure. Thank you for moderating. Thank you. And
it.
thank you all. Good luck on your leadership journey.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks.